Okay, welcome to the October 30th, I guess it's Mischief Night, Select Board meeting. And I want to say it's nice to be back here. I have not sat in the chair seat since early September, and it's nice to see everybody. We have a full evening, largely because we're going to have a meeting with the FinCom and it's a joint meeting with the school committee and the FinCom in the middle of this meeting. So we'll try and move things through fairly quickly. We'll start with the consent agenda, town accountant's warrants, our minutes for 8/7 and 9/11, our tour guide renewal for Tom Beardsley, gift acceptances. As always, very grateful to accept a check for $2,800 for the Concord Integrated Preschool Parent Group from the parent group to the Concord Recreation Gift Account, $4,375 from the Concord Carlisle Community Chest to the Youth Coordinator Gift Account, $7,433.50 also from the Community Chest to the Community Services Gift Account, and also from the Community Chest, $8,524.50 to the Council on Aging Gift Account. We are very lucky. And we are issuing a number of one-day special licenses for Saltbox Farm. There are 4 of them for Saltbox Farm on November 2nd and the 18th from 6:30 to 9:30 at 40 Westford Road for wine and malt beverages. On the November 4th and December 7th from 6 to 9 p.m. at 40 Westford Road for wine and malt beverages. On November 9th from 5:30 to 8:30 p.m. on 40 Westford Road, wine and malt beverages. Gosh, I hope somebody can keep track of this. And on the 29th of November from 7 to 10 p.m. 40 Westford Road for wine and malt beverages. The Concord Museum will issue a one-day special license for the 1st of December from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. at 200 Lexington Road, all alcohol. Concord Academy on the 2nd of November from 7 to 9 p.m. at 166 Main Street for all alcohol. And the trustees on the 18th of November from 3 to 6 p.m. at 269 Monument Street for malt beverages only. We are also issuing an extension of hours to Saltbox Kitchen for the 1st of, the 1st of January 2018 until 10:30 p.m. or with last call at 10 p.m., 84 Commonwealth Avenue. A Sunday entertainment licenses for the Concord Orchestra on the 3rd of December from 2 to 5 p.m. at 51 Walden Street for their holiday concert. And we will also be, it's that time of year, our proclamation for Kukla Day on December 7th, 2017. Mark your calendars.
Move to approve the consent agenda as read.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Now we're going to approve the executive session minutes. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Well, move to approve the executive session minutes number 1, 2, and 3 of October 16th, 2017, not to be released.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. Town Manager?
Thank you,
Your
Madam
report.
Chair. It's a rather lengthy report tonight, so bear with me. We had a severe storm last night, as you know, so the Public Safety Departments and Public Works Department were out all night. The Police Department had an extra dispatcher on until 4:30 when things quieted down. Public Works responded to many calls for downed trees, including a couple of major trees on Lowell Road and Strawberry Hill Road. The light plant was out restoring power. I think we lost about 8 customers, some on Garfield Road and Paparazzi. Schools were closed in towns to the north of us due to some more substantial trees down and power outages, so we were fortunate. And along those lines, we received a request for mutual aid from the town of Reading, or the light plant in Reading, the municipal light plant, and we've sent 2 trucks and 2-man crews to help in Reading with restoring from the damage. The Ride-Out Playground improvements dedication ceremony was at 5 o'clock this afternoon, and the chair was there. The project's about 95% complete. The top course of paving is required and striping of the parking stalls, and the covered area is going to be built in December.
And for those who haven't visited, it is truly impressive. It's great to see something from the vision all the way through. It's a real improvement.
And the representatives of the Anderson family there who lived on the property for 100 years before selling the property to the town were there for the dedication. Sorry, I'll speak up. An RFP will be issued, or proposals are due on Thursday for telecom services for a location in the Emerson umbrella cupola. Proposals are due on Thursday. Verizon has a weak signal. 2 carriers, including Verizon, have taken out the paperwork necessary to respond to that proposal. So we're hoping to improve cell phone coverage in that area. A reminder that November 15th is the public hearing on parking issues. The consultant will be there, as well as the planning director and the police chief, to answer questions.
And that will be here.
Discuss. It'll be in the hearing room on Wednesday, November 15th. Nagog Pond water treatment plant. The court remanded a decision back to the Acton Board of Selectmen to reconsider our application for a water treatment facility, and that hearing has been scheduled for November 20th in the Acton Town Hall, so we'll be going to that. A complaint was filed in land court last Wednesday in support of the public's continued access to Esterbrook Road, which was posted as private property last December. So we did file that. We've heard from a few people their opinions on that. The Finance Committee's Guidelines Subcommittee has presented a tentative guidelines, 2.7% for the town, about $630,000 of additional spending for next year. So I'll be revisiting with the Guidelines Subcommittee before they set final guidelines at the end of November. On Lowell Road, the Planning Department staff report that they've met with 4 different developers interested in developing that 87-acre parcel on the westerly side of the road. So the property may not be under agreement, but it's obviously on the market. And the proposals range in density from 36 units to 60 units. The NRC has posted the conservation land around Warner's Pond for no hunting. There's been hunting taking place in that area. The DOC, Department of Corrections property, does permit hunting, and so some of the hunters have been wandering onto the conservation land, so the NRC has made it clear that's not permitted on the town property. The Regional Housing Services Group has relocated to 37 Knox Trail, vacating the space they were using at 141 Kaiser Road for about 3 years. The strategic plan for the municipal light plant is now out in draft form, and public comments will be welcome on that. The Public Works Department discussed the public shade tree inventory. A substantial amount of time, money was spent to inventory all of our public shade trees. Some hazardous trees were identified, and the timing on taking down some of those trees is going to be discussed. And lastly, the Visitor Center is closed on Sunday for the season, as is the custom. They'll open for the Thanksgiving Day weekend, and then it won't be open again until Patriots Day holiday approaches. That's all I have.
The shade trees, do we have an idea as to how many are immediately coming down? I know there's been some concern that...
We take down about 300 a year, so I don't think we're going to go any more rapidly than that. So it'll be typical, but we'll prioritize the ones that present the greatest danger.
Such as the ones that came down on Lowell Road.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, and seeing that it is 7:08, and we have a number of public hearings which have been withdrawn or continued, we're going to move straight to our, we have to take, okay, all right.
Move to
There we
reopen
go. Excuse me.
the continued public hearing, gas main petition, National Grid 1 through 105 Lexington Road.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I understand they're planning to...
They are requesting to withdraw the application.
So I move to close the public hearing.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye. I move to allow National Grid to withdraw without prejudice the gas main petition for 1 through 105 Lexington Road.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye. The next one is move to open the public hearing continued public hearing, transfer of all alcoholic beverage license and new common particular license, ML Restaurant Group, Inc., doing business as Michael's Restaurant, and Concord Brewery 2, Inc., doing business as Rapscallion at 208 Fitchburg Turnpike.
All in favor? Aye. And I believe they have requested more time, so we should continue that.
I would move to continue the public hearing to November 13th, 2017 at 7:05 PM.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Now, having tried to skip all of that, we're now at, not quite at 7:15 in our next, when we will start our budget joint meeting. So I'm going to ask the judge if you would please join us for the hazardous mitigation plan discussion. I should say, fire chief.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tom Judge, Interim Fire Chief, and I'm here tonight with the updated hazard mitigation plan that, as you know, is required by FEMA for us to remain eligible for federal hazard mitigation funds. The process for this plan began in January of 2016 with meetings with town staff. We had 2 public hearings. The last one was at the Select Board meeting May 8th, 2016. Since then, the plan was submitted to MEMA and FEMA and has been approved by FEMA and is now simply in need of the board's approval for adoption.
Okay, any discussion, any questions amongst the board?
Saw the letters and seemed fairly, things are moving along properly.
And it makes, what, the key point to this is that it allows the town to apply for FEMA funds where
Yes.
required or necessary.
Yes, without the plan in place, we would lose eligibility for FEMA mitigation funds.
I'm sorry.
Sorry. Okay. Thanks. Here we go.
Ready for a motion?
I stand ready.
I move to adopt the Town of Concord Hazard Mitigation Plan 2017 update in accordance with Mass General Laws, Chapter 40, Section 4, or the Charter and Bylaws of the Town of Concord.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we have
Thank you.
truly outdone ourselves because we now have 3 minutes. So let's see, what can we move to now? I don't think Delia's here yet, so we could do a number of our committee liaison reports. As the liaison to the long-range planning effort, I want to really compliment the long-range plan committee on having executed a very impressive public outreach day. For those of you who didn't join them at the high school, I guess it was last weekend or weekend before, they walked through the long-range plan process and where we are, which is still open. There'll be public hearings on it, but it was a really strong effort to engage as many that as were there on all the 6 areas of sustainability that the American Planning Association has identified, and how Concord is looking, how all the committees and all the input that's come thus far is translating into that. I don't know whether anybody else, I think Alice, you were there for part of that?
It was very full.
It was.
There was a lot of substance to it.
Which is, as I understand, significant for this effort, because other previous long-range plans have been robust, but not on the level, not intentionally as full of outreach as this has, and which also means there's a lot to swallow. So,
Well, that's a good lead-in to, I went to the Commission on Disability held on October 19th, and there was a discussion of their reply to the Long Range Planning Committee. There was also discussion of the public accessibility mapping project, where they're looking, they've consulted with various places, examples of Braille maps and potential visitor center maps. Then there's also a discussion of closed caption for the CCTV and perhaps town meeting as well, and some of the cost and what other towns are doing in that regard. And so I think there'll be some follow-up on that. Their next meeting is November the 9th, and they'll be talking about the Emerson Arts renovation at that time. I also went to the Board of Assessors meeting, which was held on the 26th, where there was a discussion of the senior exemption and the review and editing of the application for exemption on that. The deadline on that will not be until September 1st, 2018, but they're trying to get all the paperwork, making sure that it's in a form that people can come in after the 1st, or as soon as they have to submit their tax forms. So as soon as they file their taxes, they'll be able to complete the application. They voted on Chapter 61, 61A, and 61B applications, and there's a discussion of the classification meeting that they're going to be holding with the Select Board on November 13th. I explained that and went through that. So it was a long, very well-done meeting.
Okay, I attended the Public Works Commission, and you heard about the tree inventory. A few interesting points you might like to know, that there were 23,762 public trees, and each one has been inventoried and photographed and entered into a database. And that database is called Tree Keeper. It's a software management system, and it will be available for citizens to be able to look at trees that you're interested in, and mark their changes, and it will be inventoried every so often as changes are made to protecting the trees. That'll be updated in the database, so citizens will be able to access it through a GIS system.
This sounds like a critical piece for the famous Concord Carlisle Leaf Project.
We did say we have to protect our trees for the leaf project. We also heard a very good presentation from, you probably know, the Hometown Winter Forecast Group. We heard what is in store for this winter. So the good news is we're not going to have a lot of snow until March and April.
Didn't know we had one. The hometown.
These are services that are provided specifically for Public Works Commissions, because, we all get the weather reports and we hear them, throughout the day. These are tailored to understanding the change in atmospheric conditions, the likelihood that the roads will freeze, and the kinds of materials that should be used for maintaining the roads so they're easy and clear for drivers. So it was a very interesting take on the weather report, because it has to do with managing our roads and making them safe for citizens. I think the project is almost done in West Concord, where there are some bump outs, the little courtyard area, the patio area.
Just waiting for
And
final paving.
one of the nice things about it is that the new sidewalks were designed with porous pavers, so they're environmentally sound. I attended the Mass Municipal Associations. I'm a member of the Policy Committee on Public Works, Transportation, and Public Utilities. And the two big things that are coming up from the MMA's interest are two initiative petitions that we will certainly hear more about. One is what is being referred to as the millionaire's tax. And the second one is a change. These are both have been approved by the AG's office for the 2018 ballot. So one is for a constitutional amendment to provide resources for education and transportation through an additional tax on incomes in excess of $1 million. The second initiative petition, also certified, is an initiative petition for a law reducing the burden of sales and use tax, requiring a state sales tax and requiring a state sales tax-free weekend. So it's very complicated. If one passes and the other doesn't, there's a lot of confusion about what may likely happen, so there's more to come on that. Let's see, I think maybe that's good enough.
Okay.
The tree issue, is there also an effort to sort of prune or to fertilize and sort of try to help trees that seem to be under stress rather than killing them?
Yep, there's a management plan for each tree. So trees that need to be trimmed to encourage new growth, trees that need to be trimmed that are compromising the utility wires, are all being addressed in this tree management program. So each one of these trees has a management plan to go with it.
In fact, the goal is not to have to cut them
Right.
down.
Yeah.
And there's a tree replacement policy. For every tree that comes down, a new tree is planted.
Right. So, well, I think we have met and passed that vital 7:15 moment of opening our joint meeting. If everybody has an agenda, they'll find the agenda for the joint meeting on the back. We saved some paper here. And so I'm now officially opening the Town of Concord's joint meeting between the Select Board, Finance Committee, and School Committees, looking at our 2019 revenue forecast and budget planning session. I'm Jane Hotchkiss, the Chair of the Select Board this year, and I think my official role is to do some introductions, although I'm going to let individuals introduce themselves. Since most of you know who the Select Board are, because this is our regularly scheduled meeting time, I'm going to move it to the end of the table, which is the FinCom, and then I guess the school committee. Do we want to bring the school committee members
Sure.
to the table? That makes, I think, sense for this portion of the meeting. It's easier for those in the public to respond, and their microphones, too. Tom, do you want to start with your introduction, and then we can go around? Or perhaps Carrie, you can kick it off. This is Carrie LaFleur, our... Let's move.
I'm Tom Tarpey, a member of the Finance Committee and the chair this year of the Guidelines Subcommittee.
My name is Mary Hartman. I'm a member of the Finance Committee.
I'm Carl Packard, and I'm the chair of the Finance Committee this year.
June Ripsinski, member of the Finance Committee.
Linda Miller, member of the Finance Committee.
Can everybody hear?
Nope.
We almost want to touch the microphones, folks. Sorry about that. We don't have enough chairs, I guess.
Dan Conti, the chair of the Concord Carlisle Regional School Committee.
And I think our chair of the Concord Carlisle Public School Committee is on her way.
Yes, she's out of country
Right,
right now. She's in
winging her way.
Japan, en route to Japan.
Right.
Yeah. But we have the vice chair of
Awesome.
the Concord School Committee.
And does everybody else from the school committee want to introduce themselves for those in the...
Joanna Boyd, Vice Chair, Concord School Committee. Melissa McNamara, Regional.
Robert Long, Vice Chair of the Regional School Committee.
Lori Hunter, Superintendent.
Great. And with no further ado, I think this is my job is now to turn this over to Lori and John to jump into the meat of this.
And if I can just take a moment, if it's
Yeah,
all right, to
please do.
introduce Dr. Hunter. This is her first year, as many of you know, as superintendent of CPS and the regional high school. And I just want to welcome her to this public forum and to the process, to the budget process. And I've really been impressed with her meticulousness and attention to detail thus far in the process. And so I introduce Dr. Lori Hunter.
Great, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here tonight and have my first joint meeting with all of you. I've met many of you through different opportunities, but it's nice to be in one place all focused on the same topic, which obviously is an important one to all of us. John's going to open up with a brief update on the FY18 budget, and then I'll talk on where we're at with the FY19 budget development process.
So the FY18 budget, we're fully staffed now. We have a couple of minor vacancies here and there, but we're well underway into the school year.
And what we learned over the summer was that we had some very expensive move-ins in special education that will put about $600,000 to $700,000 of pressure on our FY18 operating budget. Those will be that will be a challenge we need to deal with. This year, we also deal with an additional mid-year step for the Concord Teachers Association. We were well aware of that in advance, and we've made plans in our FY17 closing process by carrying over a certain amount of special education circuit breaker monies. But the additional special education tuitions and also continued growth in the Concord Integrated Preschool are going to present some pretty significant challenges to the FY18 budget.
So our approach to the 18 budget is very much like it's going to be for the development of the 19 budget. It's a reasonable, effective, but thoughtful process in spending money only where we're going to have effectiveness and have direct impact on children. That being said, in my first year, I'm obviously learning a lot, and that's been the goal of this FY18 process. I'm taking a very hands-on approach to the point of approving or not approving every purchase order that's submitted. So I'm learning a great deal about where our money's going and how we're spending it, way down at the low level and as well as up on the higher levels. I'm rolling all that information forward into the FY19 budget development process. So we are about a month into what has another few weeks to go to get to an actual draft budget. So the early part of October was spent meeting with all of the administrators, really analyzing our FY18 and historical spending across all of the different cost categories and really understanding where our costs have gone. Within that background work, we did some pretty extensive number crunching to see what our current status was and what we could project would be some of those concerns or successes going forward. John's referenced a good number of them because they are significant factors in the FY18 budget, which we are actively monitoring and carefully maintaining. Highlights of those we brought to the Finance Committee a few weeks ago, so it's worth highlighting them again tonight, I think. Special education, which is not only a mandate, but we want to do right by children. That's our most important priority. Sometimes right by children comes with a great cost, and that's because the needs of the child are that extensive. We did have significant move-ins over the summer this year, but we also have had some challenges in the past. So we've used circuit breaker money in the past, as John mentioned. The region has zero carryover. The local CPS budget has some carryover left, but we are anticipating needing to tap some of that to be able to close FY18. So special education, as you know, is a moving target. It's one of the most fluid pieces of our operating budgets and one of our greatest challenges to predict. We're always looking for efficiencies, effectiveness. We're working hard to keep children in district and have some discussions going on as to what we might be able to continue to move forward there. But it really is about meeting the needs of children, and that's why the law mandates that we serve them in the way that they're required. John mentioned the contracts for the FY19 budget. The CPS contract has percentage increases both at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year as that contract grew to have parity with the high school contract. So essentially it's a double hit next year of almost $850,000+ significance. So that's a great discussion for us going into FY19. OPEB continues to be a discussion at the high school level as we try to fund what we believe is a reasonable and reflective cost savings forward to what those future costs will be. They are in direct competition right now for the dollars that we're putting into classrooms. So that is our concern there. Transportation, we are needing to maintain a bus fleet that's reliable and up to par. So we are looking at needing to replace 2 buses at the regional level and 2 buses at the Concord level. So those come with price tags, obviously. E&D needs to get mentioned at the high school because excess and deficiency is your stabilization fund there. That fund has been tapped for the last couple of years for operating costs, and obviously you can only do that so many times before that's not going to work. Probably finally, and of great importance to this group tonight, is the shift of the enrollment at the high school. For the October 1st enrollment this year, the Concord percentage has shifted from 73.51% to 75.46%. That's almost a 2% increase to Concord, decrease to Carlisle, which will be approximately $550,000. So we have a lot of moving pieces going into the budget before we've even looked at the line items, which is what we're doing right now. But those are the higher level factors that we're already very actively discussing. This past week, we met with all the central office administrators. John and I spent last week looking at line items, especially at the district level. This coming week, the principals will return to us one at a time, having perused their own budgets, anything that is housed under their roof. They've got purview to give us feedback on. And savings right now is the mindset, I assure you, so that we're hopefully providing level service at hopes of a lesser cost. We'll be consolidating all the work this week into next week, presenting a draft budget to the school committees on November 14th, with the public hearing scheduled for the 28th. So that's where we are right now.
I just wanted to comment on the fact that each of the individual principals are inputting. That's, as a parent in the system, I don't remember that happening in the past, and I certainly applaud it. It's nice to know that that level of engagement and responsibility is being brought forward.
It matters. Building principal in me for 14 years could not have them be involved. It is a change in the past, so I think it's a much more informed process for both sides if they're engaged. That's it.
Okay. So I think, Chris,
So I think
this is now your moment.
I'm up next to provide a broad overview for the current year and what's coming ahead for the coming year. So in terms of the current fiscal year, the town departments are in good shape. There's only one identifiable area of concern, which is the legal budget. We spent about 50% of the legal budget through the first quarter of this year, so that's an area that we'll have to monitor throughout this year. And I've suggested an increase in the legal budget for the next fiscal year. We have a couple of union contracts that are expired or haven't yet been put in place, but we have funds reserved for those two contracts, and we've settled two others. So we're in pretty good shape in terms of collective bargaining. It'd be nice if we didn't get much snow this winter. That would help the snow and ice account. In terms of capital projects that were approved for implementation this year, we've pretty well successfully implemented most of them, including the purchase of 55 Church Street, and folks have now moved in. The Human Services operation have moved into 55 Church Street. We have a new fire engine, a new ambulance, just in time for the fire station improvements. Police radio equipment was donated by Middlesex Schools, so that was nice. It came off the capital plan because the school was willing to make that donation. And the final piece is a parking lot rehabilitation of the Keyes Road and Walden Street parking lots. That was planned for this fall, but deferred to next year because of just the Public Works Department having a lot of work. So we're pretty well along with our capital improvement program for the current year. Next year on the capital plan is continued improvements in the parking. The Harvey Wheeler parking lot is down for improvement, and the regular roads program, but also the purchase of 7 acres near Warner's Pond. We've yet to enter into bargaining with the property owner, but there's an interest in selling it to the town, so there'll be a land acquisition purchase on the town meeting warrant likely in April if we can come to terms. So that's where things stand.
So, Carrie, I believe it's your moment. Do you have a microphone? Okay, there we go. Here we go.
Okay, so I'm going to speak about where we are in terms of fiscal 18 and then talk about what fiscal 19 is looking like from a revenue perspective. So at this point in time, we are in the process of getting ready to have our tax rate certified for fiscal 18. And we have just had our new growth certified, and that is the one piece of information that we were waiting for in order to be able to get our rate certified. So the good news is that our new growth for fiscal 18 is once again higher than what we projected. This is a table that shows where our new growth is coming from for fiscal 18. The total amount of new property taxes from new growth is $1,321,330, and you can see that most of that is coming from increases in residential value. Oops. I have my presentation on two different computers, so I have to make two different adjustments to move to the next slide. So in terms of the tax rate for fiscal 18, we are looking at an overall increase of 4.35%. Now, we always break out the calculation between the property tax increase to the existing base, which means to existing residents, and then break out the increase that is attributable to the new growth. So the property tax increase to the existing base is 2.78%, and then overall 4.35% when you add in new growth. At this point in time, we're estimating a tax rate of $14.29 as opposed to $14.07 for fiscal 17. The average assessed value is now over $1 million at $1,014,000, and the estimated median average assessed valuation is $839,000. If you look over, I don't think I have a highlighter, but when we started the budget process about a year ago, we estimated that the property tax increase to the existing base would be 3.08%. We've really had very minor changes going forward, and with the increase in new growth that is higher than what we expected, that increase has come down to 2.78%, so that's good news. In terms of where we are for fiscal 19, we, believe it or not, are well underway with planning for fiscal 19. And at this point in time, based on the information that we have available, we expect that we will have an overall increase in revenue of 3.06%. Most of that increase will come from property taxes, and I understand this is a busy slide. But what we do each year is we go through our calculation to determine the maximum allowable levy limit for the coming year. And we take the prior year base, we multiply that by 2.5% to allow for the Prop 2.5 increase that we can have without any additional authorization from the voters. And we add in an estimate for new growth. Now, our estimate for new growth for fiscal 19 is $950,000. That is much lower than what we've seen over the last 3 years, but the reason that we are using $950,000 at this point in time is based on the development that is either anticipated or underway. And we really need to have shovels in the ground. We need to have construction happening now in order to have that development impact new growth as of the following July 1st. And so while we have a number of projects that are being contemplated, we don't have a number that are far enough along that would give us reason to bump up that new growth number any higher than $950,000. Now, that may change as we get closer to town meeting, and we are certainly able to adjust that number if it is warranted based on what we're seeing out in the field, so to speak. And then we add in the estimate for exempt debt, and that is actually higher in fiscal 19. And it's not that we have an increased amount of debt service, it's because the amount available in the high school debt stabilization fund is decreasing, and we only have $225,000 left in that fund to offset the debt for fiscal 19, whereas we had been taking out, I think in the current year, $785,000, so that's a significant difference. And in order to identify what is available in property taxes, I work with the Finance Committee, and what we have decided to do is we have 4.7% of unused levy capacity. And so the estimate for fiscal 19 is that we will retain that 4.7% of unused levy capacity. And that's how we come up with an available amount of property taxes of $84.4 million. In terms of state aid, this is very early in the process. If you follow the budget development at the state level, the governor does not even issue a budget until the end of January. So anything that we make for an estimate for state aid is very speculative at this point in time. I am projecting an increase of 2.23%. That's about $109,000. That really is just looking historically what we have seen on the low end for the last several years. We receive our state aid, most of our state aid comes from Chapter 70, which is education funding, and then, UGA, it drives me crazy because I'm still not used to unrestricted general government aid. Old-timers like me just called it lottery aid, but this is just general aid that comes to us that we can use for any particular purpose. So as I mentioned, the state really isn't even working on fiscal 19 at this point. The first time they really talk about their 19 budget will be in December when they have a joint legislative committee that will look at revenue estimates. So we really don't have anything other than to go back and look at historical trends. In terms of local receipts, I'm projecting an increase of 4.42% or $315,000. These are just a few of the line items that comprise local receipts. And the two that I would like to point out, or three that I would like to point out, would be motor vehicle excise. That is our largest local receipt. I'm projecting a fairly small increase. We don't tend to see larger increases in motor vehicle excise receipts here that you might find in other communities. Our hotel motel excise tax has been very strong, especially with the opening of the new hotel. Right now, I'm estimating a $500,000 budget there, but that may be low. Our first quarter estimates were our first quarter receipts were $191,000, so that estimate might be a little low. And as the Finance Committee works through the budget guideline over the next month before they set their final guideline, we may be able to bump that up somewhat. The same thing goes with the meals tax. I've estimated $380,000, but through the first quarter of fiscal 18, we've collected $109,000, so that might be a little low as well. We also will take another look at building permits and our investment income before the final revenue estimate is provided to the Finance Committee for their final guideline. Available funds, these are really all other funds. I've already mentioned line 65, the high school debt stabilization fund. We only have $225,000 left in that, so we will be zeroing out that account. This estimate does assume that we will take $1 million from free cash to reduce property taxes. We did spend quite a bit out of free cash at the last annual town meeting, but based on how we believe we're closing fiscal 18, we do expect that we would have $1 million available in 19 to reduce the 19 property taxes while still maintaining close to a 10% reserve in free cash. So then next, after we identify what we have available in total for receipts, we look at what our fixed costs are, and we have to back those out before we determine what is available for the guideline accounts. So these are all of our fixed costs, and in total we're expecting fixed costs to rise 3.2%, which doesn't seem particularly unreasonable given that all of our employee benefits are covered in this particular area. I did want to mention two of our fixed costs that we are seeing a higher increase than what we have seen over the past years. First would be group insurance. At this point in time, we are expecting that we will receive a renewal that is 10%, maybe higher than that, but that won't be available until February 2018. Our plan year is June 1 through May 31, so we're well in advance of knowing what our actual renewal will be. But based on our claims data for the last 24 months, based on the fact that the fund balance in our health insurance consortium is at an all-time low, we do expect to see larger or higher increases in health insurance going forward. I would like to mention that beginning June 1st, we will be offering a high deductible plan to employees, and we do expect that premiums will be in the 15 to 25% lower than what we are paying at this point in time. So we're hoping to get employees excited about the high deductible plans, but we do expect that the enrollment will be low in the first year as people are getting used to these plans and how they work. The second item that I would like to mention is OPEB. We do intend to fully fund our annual required contribution again in fiscal 19, but based on our last valuation, we do expect that the contribution needs to be about 10% higher than what we have been funded. We do value that liability on an annual basis, but there is a significant lag in when we receive that valuation. So the data that we use is really about 18 months old when it comes into the budget. So it's not that we're doing any better or any worse. It's just we've had some changes in the actuarial assumptions that I don't really need to get into unless there are questions about that, but that has resulted in an increase in what we need to contribute in fiscal 19. And then we have some non-guidelines or non-appropriated accounts. These also have to be taken into account as we determine what is available for guidelines. We're expecting a 3.33% increase, and these are mostly our state assessments and the overlay account and any snow and ice deficit that we might be carrying forward. So lastly, what we expect to have available for guidelines is an increase of 2.97% that results, or $2,311,877. So as was previously mentioned, one of the challenges is the shift in enrollment at the high school. The superintendent mentioned the impact on the 19 budget. On the 18 budget, I had calculated this before the superintendent came in front of the Finance Committee, but just on the current year budget, that almost 2% shift would result in an increase of $350,000, closer to $550,000 based on the fiscal 19 budget as we see it at this point in time. The other thing that I would mention is, I mentioned at the beginning that the Finance Committee looks at maintaining the same percent of unused levy capacity. Another option would be to maintain the same dollar amount. So if we were to maintain the same dollar amount, just over $4 million, that would result in about $140,000 in additional revenue. So that's something that could be looked at. But again, we're very early in the process, and revenue estimates, we continue to look at those as we move through the budget process, and fixed costs as we get closer to insurance renewals, we update those numbers as well. So that is my presentation, and then I have a slide that, because of the timing of this meeting, the Finance Committee has actually voted its tentative guidelines, so I believe we'll have somebody from the Finance Committee review that.
Sure.
So we get to hear it first here.
Thank you, Carrie. So, okay, yeah, there's the tentative guidelines. These are the guidelines that will be that are being sent out in a couple of days to the town and the schools, and then we will be meeting with those groups later on in the month, and then we come out with our final guidelines by the 1st of December. A couple of things that we looked at in coming up with this, of course, you know, there were many very good things that were brought up as being desirable and in some extent necessary for these budgets. So we have to kind of winnow that. A couple of things that we did look, first of all, we did try to keep the same unused levy capacity, as Carrie said. And the other things that we looked at were the salary increases, the generally built-in salary increases for the employees, and we used a number that basically we sort of averaged everything, and it you know, we could probably refine that number, but the number we were using was 2.5%. And then the other piece that went into it, you'll see that the increase for the high school is somewhat larger than the other one, so we built in the $500,000 increment due to the shift in enrollment. So it comes out to just a little under 3% total, and the effect on the taxes would be, I guess, approximately 2.75%. To be continued.
So, Tom, did you have anything to add to this?
Not to Carl's summary, which I think was pretty thorough. I would like to add that the topic of sustainability has been really in the forefront in guidelines discussions for the last several years, and really intensified somewhat this year. And there is an awareness that we would like to see town budgets increase at a sustainable level. And what we've selected in our debate as to what is sustainable, and that was a long and interesting debate, is that we'd like to stay at or below the levy limit. It was also very much on our minds that the majority of town expense comes from salaries. And salaries are periodically renegotiated. And we feel, as the Finance Committee, an obligation to give some forewarning to those who have the responsibility for negotiating those agreements that we need to stay within a certain limited increase in budget. And we hope that by so forewarning, we will also forearm those who are responsible and allow them to explain that situation to the employees who are on the other side of that table. I think that's really all I had to add.
Okay. Before we move to public comment, is there any discussion amongst the Select Board, FinCom, school committees?
The taxes,
You
the
need a microphone, Tom.
1.5% for the CPA and the 0.5% for the senior exemption, is that built into the figure? Or is that in?
I think the CPA basically it doesn't come into the operating budget. That's sort of its own fund operating on its own level. And then, of course, the 0.5%, I think probably, where's Carrie? Probably does come off of the tax revenue that can be raised, because it has to be compensated for.
That's actually just a shift. It's not an increase in what is available, it's just a shift over who is going to pay for that.
All right, with that, I want to open it up to public comment. We have a microphone in the middle of the room. And please identify yourself and give your address.
Yes, John Flynn, 50 Range Road in Concord. My question is, we have a nice new bus facility, but it doesn't have any water, and I wonder why. I hear we're trucking water into it every week, and we've drilled a well that's polluted, that we can't use it, and we also put in tanks to hold water and a fancy pumping system, and I wonder who's responsible for that, and how are we going about resolving it?
Chris Whalen, Town Manager, I'm responsible for it. It's not correct that we did sink a bedrock well 500 feet below the facility, and the water is clean. EPA asked us not to use that water, not to use that well, because they're evaluating the impact of the nuclear metal site on Acton's water district wells nearby. So we're awaiting authorization to use that well, and in the meantime, we are trucking potable water to the facility, and the employees are drinking bottled water, which was the plan all along. So it's a site that's compromised. It's a Superfund site with the contamination below, and the Acton Water District has a hydrant that's about 100 feet from the building, as you know.
Locked off.
Pardon?
Locked off, so there's no fire protection in the building now. We just lost a firehouse with a fire truck. Now we're going to lose a bus depot with a bus?
So there's a fire hydrant about 100 feet away from the building, and we've asked the Acton Water District to allow us to connect to that hydrant. They originally said no. This most recent request, they've referred to a committee, and our request is pending. So it may be that we'll be able to connect to the Acton Water District at some point in the future. And it's correct that there's no sprinkler system. If we do connect to the Acton Water District system, we would sprinkler the building, I believe.
How much is it costing each week to bring water to the building?
I don't know. It's not an unreasonable amount of money.
What's reasonable? Is
I
$1,000
could get that for you, John. Just call my office.
No, just curious. Is it $1,000 a week or is it $5,000 a week?
I honestly don't know. I'd have to check with the Public Works Department who've made the arrangements.
Okay, that's not why I came here tonight, but this is a good time to mention. You got the school committee, the finance committee, and that's why I asked.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public? Here you have 3 committees in front of you. Okay, so seeing no, I guess that's Kessler.
Just fixing it because of that.
Seeing no further comment, do I hear a motion to, or I guess we don't need to move. I think this may officially adjourn our joint public meeting. And I thank both the FinCom and members of the school committee for joining us. No doubt you want to stay for the rest of it. Okay, so I believe next up on our agenda is going to be the Black Birch Phase 1 conservation restriction, and Delia, I think I saw in the audience, Delia Kay, our Natural Resources Director, will be with us shortly. Hey, Delia. Okay, welcome. With a microphone, why don't you join us?
Here, you can
Yeah.
borrow mine.
Here we go. Or sit over there, whatever works.
Whoa, sorry. Thank you.
Okay.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Delia K, Natural Resources
You're going to have to
Director.
speak up way close.
Okay. Delia K, Natural Resources Director for the town. And here for the Black Birch 1 Conservation Restriction, request for Select Board to approve this conservation restriction. With me is Mark Kablack, who is an attorney with Kablack and Associates, and also Jerry Evans, a builder with Abode Builders, who's been the lead on the development at Black Birch. So as the board likely recalls, this property off Forest Ridge Road has a 25-unit alternative PRD in over 55. And as part of that construction that was approved through special permit and town meeting actions in 2015 and 2016, 1.01 acres of land was conveyed to the town for conservation purposes earlier this year. And this current request for approval is for 6.31 acres to be conveyed from Black Birch Development Partners to the Natural Resources Commission under conservation restriction. It's over 2 parcels that are within and adjacent to the development, and also connects to other town land. In the vicinity, there are trails that are existing trails on the current town land, as well as trails that Abode and Black Birch Development have worked to place on the land to be conveyed, on both the town land that they recently conveyed, as well as on the conservation restriction, as well as 3 spaces of public parking that is just outside the conservation restriction that would be available to the public. So a real amenity, yes, for both the neighborhood, yes, easy parking, as well as for the general public. So the CR was conveyed on October 6th and accepted by the Natural Resources Commission at their meeting on October 18th, and I'm here tonight requesting your approval of that conservation restriction, which has also been favorably reviewed by the state.
Well, this sounds like a wonderful piece of a puzzle that we're lucky to be receiving. Discussion?
This is part of the deal, it's great.
Okay. Do I hear a motion?
Yes, I move to approve a conservation restriction pursuant to Massachusetts General Laws, Sections 31 through 33 of Chapter 184 over 6.31 acres granted by the Black Birch Development Partners, LLC, on October 6, 2017, accepted by the Natural Resource Commission on October 18, 2017, and shown as parcels B and D on a plan entitled Conservation Restriction Plan, dated February 22, 2017, prepared by Places Associate, Inc.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, and thank you. All right, lest you go anywhere, Delia, I think
going anywhere?
we're moving right on to the White Pond water quality discussion. So,
Good evening. I'm here for the White Pond Water Quality update for the Select Board. With me is Matt Ladewig, who is a certified lake manager and senior scientist with ESS. ESS Group is the organization that prepared the White Pond Watershed Management Plan in 2015. And as a result of the bloom, the blue-green algae bloom that we were seeing at White Pond in 2015, we asked ESS to conduct some additional water quality monitoring to see if there was additional information that could be learned from that. And Matt is here to provide you with a presentation on that, on the results of the sampling and possible recommendations.
Am I correct factually that this year it was closed down 1 time, and I believe the year before about 3 or 4 times?
So in the summer of 2015, it was almost essentially closed the entire summer. Mm-hmm. And then 2016, it actually was, it was only closed, it actually was never closed, but there were some potential blooms that were observed late in the season, in the fall. And then this year, there was a sort of I would say an advisory closure over a weekend. The actual levels of the bacteria never reached toxic levels, but the health department decided to just issue that closure out of an abundance of caution.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Welcome, Matt.
Thank you. Would you like me to stand up or sit down? What works best for you guys?
Whatever works. But for the record, please introduce yourself as well.
Yes. Matt Ladwig, as Delia mentioned, I'm a certified lake manager with ESS Group.
You can pull the microphone closer if it's easier.
I do have handouts for you guys too. Let me pass those around first.
Thank you.
These are just copies of the presentation.
We can offer that into the, okay. I've got this right here.
All right, so I'll state my name again, Matt Ladwig. I'm a certified lake manager with ESS Group. And as Delia mentioned, I'll be presenting to you tonight, thank you for having me, about updates on White Pond, what we learned over the 2016-2017 study period. So just a little overview of what we did and why we did it. Our approach this year focused on three major factors in response to the blooms from 2015. Basically, what we wanted to get at here is what's coming from the shoreline, which we had already previously identified as a source of phosphorus in the watershed management plan, which was also finished in 2015. And what is coming from inside the pond itself, which is something that we hadn't really taken too detailed a look at in the past. And then thirdly, so that represents the sediment sources in the pond. And thirdly, we wanted to look at what was actually happening in the pond on a given day. So sort of a day in the life of the pond to see what water quality does at all the different levels of the pond and how those dynamics might shape what's going on with phosphorus and how it could influence algae blooms in the pond. So, a basic summary of results. Our methodology for sampling the shoreline segments of the pond was similar to what we did in 2015, and for those of you who are not familiar with that, basically we set out samplers that are flush with the ground. We place them out before the storm starts, and the intent is to capture runoff and then sample what's in that runoff, send it to the lab, see what's in there. We placed the samplers at 6 locations that had the highest levels of phosphorus in our previous study. We wanted to see, has anything changed? Has it gotten better? Has it gotten worse? What's going on? So as you can see, our results really showed things are about the same. It seems like they may have gotten a little bit better. The photo that you can see in this slide actually shows one of the temporary erosion controls that's in place. So it's possible that that may have had something to do with the improvement. But pretty comparable to what we saw in the past. I will also note that this event happened in the springtime, whereas the one that we did in 2015 happened in the fall. So because of different seasonal inputs, we also thought there might be some variation in how phosphorus comes into the pond from the shoreline by season. And really, we found there was a very minimal difference. So that second component of the study that we looked at really focused on the sediments, the source from within the pond. And as I mentioned previously, this is something that we didn't really know a lot about before, but we suspected because of the way White Pond is, it's a deep kettle pond. We knew that the bottom of the pond lost all of its dissolved oxygen later in the summer, and that could set up a condition where if there's a lot of phosphorus that's bound to iron in the sediments, the phosphorus could actually be released because iron is very good at capturing phosphorus and holding on to it as long as there's oxygen. But once you lose that oxygen, the iron lets the phosphorus go and it enters the water column and becomes potentially available for use by algae to build their cells and grow and replicate. So the results of our findings here, we took 12 grabs from the bottom of the pond in shallow waters like Sachem's Cove, as well as the deeper waters, which are more than 50 feet deep. And we found that the highest levels of phosphorus, available phosphorus, were actually in the deepest sediments. So the red and orange dots that you can see on that map, for the most part, co-occur with those reddish areas. And those reddish areas are the areas I was talking about previously that actually, at the bottom of the pond, lose oxygen in the summertime. So these are areas where there's a lot of available phosphorus, mainly in a form that's bound to iron. And in the late summer and early fall, when you lose all your oxygen at those deep depths, that phosphorus can actually be released into the water column. So just because it can be released doesn't mean it is being released. And even if it is being released, is it getting into the part of the water column where the algae can actually use it? That takes us to the next element of our study. And we collected a lot of different data, but I just wanted to kind of focus on a few small things here and show what I think is one of the more colorful results of our study. This, just to sort of describe what you're looking at here, because you may not have seen a chart like this in the past. On the left-hand side, we start early in the morning, 6:30 a.m., and as you progress to the right-hand side of the chart, we get into the afternoon hours. The surface of the surface of the pond is up at the top of the chart, and the bottom of the pond is down at the bottom of the chart. So this is basically showing you what's happening at one point in the pond over the course of the entire day. The warmer colors mean higher dissolved oxygen. So you got lots of oxygen where you've got the yellows and the oranges, salmon color, and the blues and purples are where you have very little oxygen. The darker the color, the less oxygen you have in the water. So what you're seeing here is what I was just talking about. The deep waters generally don't have a lot or even any oxygen late in the season. This profile was conducted in August of 2016, so it was late summer. But you will see that it's not a static relationship. So at the top, we have changes throughout the day. Oxygen levels are changing, and at the bottom, there's some vertical variation in where you have different levels of dissolved oxygen. So normally during the summertime, what happens is the pond will stratify or set itself up in layers where you have warm water in the top and cold water at the bottom. The cold water stays with the cold water and the warm water stays with the warm water, and the two don't really mix, or at least that's the static thinking. What this shows is that over the course of one day, you're not getting a full mixing, but there are parts of the day where you seem to have this waviness, and there may be some exchange of some of the bottom water into the top of the pond. So this provides potentially a mechanism by which some of that phosphorus that's being released from those deep sediments could leak into the surface waters. Another thing that we have plotted here on this chart is the little blue dots. That's what's called the Secchi transparency. It's just a measure of water clarity. So how far down in the pond can you see? That dotted line represents the long-term median for White Pond, as Bill Walker has calculated. And you'll see that over the course of the day, our points are a little bit above or a little bit below the line, but they do vary by as much as about a meter over the course of a day. So there's a lot of change, and this number is usually influenced. It can be influenced by, if you have a rain event, there could be a lot of sediment that comes into the pond. But on a nice sunny day like this, usually what's happening is you've got algae moving up and moving down, and they're changing or moving side to side, and they're changing actually how far into the pond you can see. So this is sort of representing that as well. We're seeing all these different things on the chart.
Usage by people swimming and other activities affect this a great deal, or?
Well, does it affect it? Yes, it does. There is some phosphorus that's associated with use of the pond for recreation. We didn't find that it contributed a very large chunk of what we think the total amount of phosphorus coming into White Pond is, but it does also have an effect, yes.
Stirs it.
I'm sorry?
Does it stir it?
Oh, does it actually physically stir it? For all intents and purposes, no. The wind does a much better job of that. So now that we know these things, what are some of the management options we have available to potentially deal with this phosphorus that could be triggering algae blooms.
Could I ask a question? Would motorboats help in and stir it up a little bit? I've heard that in lakes and in the ocean that it helps drive the oxygen into the water.
Why don't we get through the report, and then we can talk about what the findings
I'm
are?
just talking about this one thing he was talking about, the dissolved oxygen, and I know a little bit about it. I know we had the problem on the river a long time ago, where it was proven that motorboats going up and down the river actually help move oxygen into the water. Just a question. I don't know anything about it, really. But,
Hold on to the answer.
Yeah.
but we could go water skiing on White's Pond. And I got a boat.
So one of the management options that's available that we've actually already kind of gone down the road of is watershed approaches. So these are things that are done outside the pond itself, but they help to prevent phosphorus from getting into the pond. One of the things that's happened that's already been completed is the renovation of the infiltration basins at the access road near the pond. Now maintenance is ongoing, so that's something that falls down below, and the more action encouraged, not just for that particular infiltration basin, but for anything that's built there that serves a function of preventing phosphorus from coming into the pond. It needs to be maintained in order to do what it needs to do. Temporary erosion controls have been installed on town-owned land, so that's good. Septic upgrades on private property here and there. And then we also developed an educational brochure on what homeowners can do to prevent phosphorus from entering into the pond, and that has been distributed too. So that's all great. One place where there's more action encouraged is really bringing into fruition the more permanent best management practices along the shoreline of the pond. So we've got the temporary stuff out now, but we can do a better job and reduce phosphorus further by completing the permanent BMPs that have already been designed and permitted at this point. So those are the primary recommendations for watershed approaches. Now there are a couple of in-pond approaches as well. One is called nutrient inactivation, and this typically involves a substance called alum, which is aluminum sulfate. Typically it's buffered with sodium aluminate so that it doesn't affect pH when it's applied to surface water. There are other formulations as well, including one called polyaluminum chloride, but I won't get into all the ins and outs of that. I just wanted to give you an idea of the fact that there's other options out there that sort of accomplish the same thing. So what basically happens here is this chemical is applied to the water. When it's applied, it creates a flocculant that actually strips out suspended sediments, algae, and most importantly, phosphorus from the water column. When it reaches the bottom of the pond and sits in the sediments, it acts to intercept phosphorus that might be released from the sediments and doesn't allow it to get into the water column. Now, I mentioned iron previously. That does the same thing, except under low dissolved oxygen conditions, iron will actually release the phosphorus. The components of an alum treatment won't do that, so it's more or less a permanent bond with phosphorus. The pros of this, it's a way to address the actual cause of excessive algae growth. So a lot of times what people will do when you have an algae problem is treat it with copper, and that kills the algae, but it doesn't address the phosphorus that's driving the algae. This does. It works quickly, so it's almost instantaneous, really, once it's applied, and it can be effective for long periods of time. So a targeted nutrient inactivation project in a pond like White Pond that doesn't have a lot of exchange of water can actually last for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. There's also an option to do what are called low-dose treatments. Now, these don't necessarily target the phosphorus in the sediments. They're meant to be applied to the water column and just sort of clean up the water column, strip out the algae, the phosphorus, suspended sediments in the water column, settle them to the ground, you'll notice an immediate improvement in water clarity. Over time, if these low-dose applications occur over multiple years or multiple events, you do eventually build up the same effective layer of alum on the bottom of the pond that then helps lock the phosphorus into the sediments. So there's two sort of subtle, well, they're not really so subtle, but two differences there. There's cost implications.
Have an
that.
effect on the fish and other...
Well, so one of the things, if you were just applying raw alum in a pond like White Pond, which has a relatively low, what they call alkalinity, so it's not very well buffered, it could cause a big pH swing. So this has been implemented in a number of ponds on Cape Cod and elsewhere in Massachusetts in the last decade or two. And what we've learned is if you know what you're dealing with water quality wise, you can buffer that application so that you don't have these swings in pH that affect fish. It's not to say it's not without risk. So there needs to be some careful study before you go dumping something into the pond. You have to know exactly what you're doing and then monitor as you're doing it so that you make sure you're not crossing any of those thresholds that would be problematic for the biology.
Can I also ask, I think my colleague was asking about the impact on fish. How about swimmers' impact on people?
Impact on people? Typically for the day of the treatment, or the days of the treatment, depending on how long it takes, you would not want to have people in the water, but after that, it clears relatively quickly. So it doesn't really have
Skin
a
irritation,
long-term,
that type of thing.
right. Well, handling the chemicals has some risks, but once it's been applied and it forms this flocculant, it's not necessarily inert because it's actually trying to bind to phosphorus for us, right? But it becomes a different beast and settles to the bottom of the pond fairly quickly. So you should be able to use the pond again very, very quickly after treatment.
So in other words, you want to let it settle to the bottom?
Correct, yep. It's not really a con of this, but one of the things we have to be careful about, like I said, is really needs a decent amount of planning. You have to know what you're doing. You have to have somebody who's applied this before. It can't be a first-time person who just wins because it's low bid. And then you have to monitor during the treatment just to make sure there's no big swings in water chemistry.
Any sense what the cost would be for something like a White Pond?
For a low-dose treatment,
Yeah.
you're probably looking at around $20,000 or so for each treatment. A high-dose treatment, given the amount of phosphorus in the pond, if you were to do it all at once, would be north of $100,000. But again, that kind of treatment is something
Might
that
last
would
for...
likely control internal sources of phosphorus from the pond sediments for many years or even decades. So that's how you can think about that, yeah. Another alternative is known as aeration or circulation, and there's lots of different variations of this. The example I have on the right up here, the little fountain, that's not going to work in White Pond. It's just too big and too deep. The example I have on the left there is more of an industrial-sized solution, which obviously this is a big change to the pond. But this is just sort of to illustrate that there's a lot of different potential ways that this could go. And there's a lot to think about on the aeration side as well. We tend to think of aeration or adding oxygen to the pond as a good thing, but if it's not done the right way, it can actually make things worse. The great thing is, yes, adding dissolved oxygen is good for fish, it's good for the pond health, but it has to be done the right way. You also have lots of different design options available at different costs, so there's lots of things to think about. You'll probably find an option that would work for you if you were interested in this. Some of the things to think about that are a little tougher: requires a lot of power to supply the air. There's some solar-powered models now, but whether they would be powerful enough to actually do the trick on White Pond is sort of up in the air. Some types are noisy, so if you have an air compressor running the whole time, that's an issue. Regular maintenance is required. You can't just leave it to sit by itself and do its thing. It's got to be worked on a lot. So that's
But motorboats on Monday might have the same effect.
Earlier question.
And then lastly, it is actually very difficult to achieve real pond-wide changes with something like this. Just the amount of energy that goes into circulating water in a pond this big is huge. It's not that it can't be done, it just requires a lot of resources and careful design. So that factors into the cost too. So really, something like this, the numbers that I would be giving you are fairly similar to what it would cost to do an alum treatment. Maybe a little bit less in some of the lower end scenarios, but again, there would need to be design involved and other things that would add to the cost too. So that's about it for my presentation, and I'll take any questions that you have.
So I have a couple. I'm thinking about that colorful slide that you had up there of the in-pond dissolved oxygen. I'm wondering if you can tell me something about how this compares to other ponds that you've studied. Is it common to see, low levels of dissolved oxygen deep into a pond, or is this what you'd expect in the pond? I don't have a base to look at whether this is a particular problem or this is a common problem.
So we don't have water quality data from White Pond a century ago, at least not that I know of. We do for Walden, to some degree. But probably when White Pond was in a more natural state, pre-settlement, it probably didn't have this happening. And this is a problem that I think has been getting worse over the years. As you have more nutrients accumulate in the pond and you get more production of organisms in the pond, those organisms respire, so they're using up oxygen. And when you have that separation of the surface waters and the bottom waters don't have access to the open atmosphere. So over the course of the summer, the dissolved oxygen levels just decline until they get to zero, essentially. So yes, this is typical for a lot of ponds now, but it wasn't always that way. There are still some kettle ponds like this, including some on the Cape, that don't have this signature. They have oxygen pretty far down into the water column.
With development around those ponds as well? I mean, it sounds like development pressures are something that may have caused some of the problems of both phosphorus and change in dissolved oxygen.
Yes and no. Some of the ponds that you would expect to be in great shape because they don't really have any development around them are not, or at least not by this measure, and we're not totally sure why yet.
How would this compare to, you said that you have more data on Walden, which doesn't have as much development right on its shore, really.
Right.
How does this compare?
Well, Walden is much deeper as well.
Yep.
So it has a similar signature that sets up, but it takes longer for that to happen because there's a lot more water volume. So it has a whole lot more oxygen that's holding on to. But eventually it does get close to something that approximates this. It's not really as extreme at this level, but they have similar patterns, yes.
Is the problem worse in a hot, dry summer than it would be in a rainy, cooler summer?
It depends on what problem you're talking about.
Well,
and then my answer is also going to be qualified by something else, but go ahead.
Well, I'm just wondering, in 2015, when the problem seemed to be worse, I believe that was a hot, dry summer, whereas this past summer, June, was really pretty cool and a lot of rain. And I'm wondering how much of effect the climate has on the phosphorus issue and the algae issue.
So in White Pond, I think we have two different things going on. We have the shoreline sourced phosphorus. That input is very likely to go up when you have lots of wet weather, especially if you have intense storms, which we're getting more of now. So wet weather puts a strain on the pond in that way, in that you have more contribution from the watershed. Dry weather is the opposite. If you have hot, dry weather, this whole process goes faster. You get algae producing, or you convert over to blue-green algae essentially faster during the season than you would normally necessarily. And because you have higher rates of respiration, you use up your oxygen faster, you can get more release from the sediments faster. So it's a little bit of both. And then there's also pond water levels influence the total volume of the pond. And right now we're at fairly low water, so there's a lot of things to think about. And that's why we structured this study the way we did.
So I have one more question. I've noticed there are a lot of people here who are probably better than I at articulating this. I'm looking at Carmen from the White Pond Advisory Committee. And the question that has been under discussion at the committee is whether there's an impact to the pond from the stocking program, the state stocking program. And I'm curious, maybe either Bill or Carmen or someone can articulate that question better, but should that be a concern about the number of fish that are being stocked, the types of fish that are being stocked, and then what happens if we do apply an alum approach to it? Working with a state agency is sometimes more difficult than if it were controlled strictly by our own community. If you have any thoughts on all of that, that would be great. And if they have helpful questions, that would be also good to hear from the White Pond Advisory Committee.
I guess I'll start off by saying that we did look at this issue a little bit in the original watershed management plan that we pulled together. Fish stocking is likely to be an input. How big it is depends on how much is stocked and how effectively that area is fished. So there's a lot of things that go into it on a year-to-year basis. I don't know of another case where fish stocking was really the primary or a major source of phosphorus to a pond. But without knowing the actual details of year to year and exactly who's pulling out what and how long those fish are staying in there, it's hard to say. It's probably a component, but how big it is it's difficult to know.
I heard Alice invite anybody from the White Pond Advisory Committee to ask questions. I want to reiterate that since.
Carmen Jacquier, the White Pond Committee, 38 Shore Drive. This is the third year I've been testing for the EPA cyanobacteria program weekly from early spring to the end of fall. And there's one thing I've noticed this year because I'm doing a more detailed study with another person who's a limnologist and also with the EPA program. And I get a concentration of the zooplankton in a zapper from water samples. And what I noticed was when I started in early May, it's full of zooplankton when I put it in the tube for a sampling. Over June, it decreases greatly. So by July 2nd, there's no zooplankton. And to this day, there's no zooplankton that I get in the samples. And I wondered if there were too many fish in the pond. Can that affect that? Because I know like the rainbow trout are put in, they're full grown, they're going to eat little fish. If there's not enough little fish, they could go back to eating zooplankton, and the zooplankton keeps the cyanobacteria under control.
Yeah, that's a food web question, which really gets pretty difficult to answer. I can say, we did look at zooplankton in our study, and we found a decent amount. That was in August of 2016, so it was last year. And we found a lot of different kinds too. Well, not a ton, but several different kinds. There are some other fish in the pond besides trout that are actually focused more on plankton as a food source. So bluegill, for instance, are one of those species. It seems likely to me that those would be more likely to have an impact than the trout would on zooplankton populations. But without having looked at that specifically in White Pond and who's eating what, it's hard to say. But yes, lack of zooplankton could have impacts to the algae community, so that could change exactly what happens with phytoplankton or the suspended algae in the pond.
Is there a
Microphone.
Is there another thing you could suggest to how we could check where the zooplankton, why it disappeared? See, I wasn't doing this exact testing in the 2 previous years, so I don't know how the population was those years, but it was just striking this year. And I know that the fish got stocked in June, early June, I think it was, and so that I saw such a increase, a dramatic increase week to week. That's why I wondered about the fish stocking.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult to answer, unfortunately.
Okay.
I can say too that we actually, we found that the zooplankton changed position at different points of the day, which they tend to do. So I don't know how your sampling was done, but
It's between 10 and 2, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m.
Well,
since that
and
point
I
on.
guess seasonally too, they may change their migration paths. So if you're sampling the same locations, it may also be possible that you'll get less in some places, but they're not necessarily gone, they've just moved to avoid predation, but I can't say for sure.
And I wanted to say that this year, there have been periodic blooms, but as different from the previous 2 years. They're small blooms and they're quick blooms. And they're always found across the White Pond Associates Beach, because that's downwind. The wind is always going down the pond towards them, and along the Powder Mill side. So I think the movement is down the pond from the north, from west to east, and then blown across to the Powder Mill side, which is the north shore of the side of the pond. You find the blooms along the beach and Thoreau Cove. There's kind of a point of land that comes out. It gets caught back there, and then down at the conservation land. And all along the Shore Drive side, it's clear, except for right at the bottom where you're next to the White Pond Associates Beach. So it seems like they're in the water column, and they're getting blown. And I've only seen, there's like 3 cyanobacteria that seem to be a signature of the pond: the Dolichosphaerum, the Warrenicinia, and Microcystis. And I've never seen anything else in the 3 years that I've been testing. So those are the ones we have, if that's any help for treatment.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, getting back to the question
Can
about
you identify yourself?
Yeah, I'm Bill Walker from Lowell Road, and I've been monitoring the pond for a couple decades. I have been able to compile, I got from the State Fish and Game, long-term records of their stocking program going back about 20 years. And it's basically categorized by different fish species and lengths and seasons. And just looking at that in a cursory way, there doesn't seem to be any long-term trend in the stocking, with the exception of in recent years they seem to be putting more fish in the fall than they used to, but even though still predominantly most of the stocking happens in the spring. But in terms of evaluating the impact on the pond, I kind of got stuck with translating that information in terms of numbers of fish of different length to a phosphorus load. So I don't know, maybe you have information of that type, that could be used. I could send you the fish data set. But the other thing that's happening in here in terms of, with respect to the fish, and this information is on my website, is over the last 10 or 15 years, there's a signal of this oxygen depletion problem has been getting worse, and the surface waters have been getting warmer, and that's linked to climate change. So the habitat for cold water fish, which require high oxygen and low temperatures, is shrinking, and that shows up in the long-term data set. So I think what we're looking at here is sort of the buildup of nutrients in the bottom from these various sources, and maybe the fish stocking may be as important as the watershed load, as far as we know. But I do agree with sort of the flavor of your presentation in terms of looking at the potential for controlling it, and that a single dose alum treatment designed to address the sediment source, to me, would be the most cost-effective way to look at this, along with, of course, the watershed management plan.
Thank you. Any other further public comments?
My name is Susan Andrews. I live at 57 White Avenue, and I've been going into White Pond since I was an embryo. So, anyways, in terms of the fish stocking, well, I've lived on the shore of White Pond now for about 13 years, and I noticed the winter before we had the first algae bloom, it was an unusual winter. It was very warm, and usually there would be ice fishermen camped out on that ice all day long with fires and tents and, you know, putting up 10 holes and just hauling those fish out. But that winter, the ice was not safe, so they weren't out there. So all those fish that were stocked in the fall were sitting in there swimming around, and no one was taking them out. And then in the springtime, they would usually stock the pond, again, right when the ice melted, which is usually the end of March, beginning of April. But this year, the ice didn't melt because there had been so much snow on the ice that was there, which was another reason they couldn't go. It wasn't safe with the warm weather with all the snow on the ice. So they delayed their first stocking. They do 3 rounds in the spring for a month. And so then they put in 3 rounds of fish in the amount of time they would have put in 2 rounds of fish. So here we have a pond that had no fish taken out of it practically at all compared to most years over the winter, and then had all these fish put in all at once, and then we got all this algae the next summer. So, you know, having read up a little bit on the impact of stocking rainbow trout specifically that like to eat zooplanktons, and specifically the large ones, which I noticed in your report, there weren't very many large ones, and the large ones are really the ones that are going to do more of a job keeping the algae from blooming. So, I don't know, I just think those are clues, and there certainly are other lakes that have addressed this imbalance and had good results. And that seems like one of the easiest things for people to control because it's people who are putting the fish in. And Thoreau wrote that White Pond had no fish big enough to be worth fishing for. And traditionally, it was so clear people would come to drink from it. So, you know, that being said, it's just about a lot of factors that we need to, and I could go on, but I won't take any more of your time, think about in terms of what's going on with all these fish being put in there and then what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments, questions? Okay, thank you very much, Matt.
Thank you
And
for having
Delia.
me.
Very interesting.
I just wanted to just let the select board know that this presentation is up on the Natural Resources website, and this is the homeowner's guide that we prepared last year with ESS.
Great. Thank you so much. And I hope everybody heard that. The presentation is available on the NRC's website.
Thank you.
Well, having just had some public comment, we are now at that special moment of public comment. Do I have, is there anybody in the audience that would like to offer general public comments or specific? Okay.
I think
Well,
there may be one comment.
oh, there is one. Okay, excuse me.
Yeah, John Flynn, 50
Yep.
Range Road. Chris, we need a new clock.
That one works.
It's what works twice a day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good point.
Okay, well, we've also finished our committee liaison reports. So we're on to miscellaneous correspondence, and in that fashion, do I hear a move? We have a number of them, so. Do we have some correspondence?
Move to authorize the, well, who were you, the letter?
I'm just looking for the letter. I don't know. Andrew? What? Thank you. I don't know that we have a letter, so I think that's an overzealous point on my part. I think we can keep moving and move on to committee nominations. Now, we have written as committee appointments, I believe what was really tonight, committee nominations for our Dog Park Feasibility Study Committee, which anyone with the agenda can see listed under.
We have 6
16.
of the 7. I'm going to check. We did have a 7th, but it was unclear as to whether she is a resident of Concord. There was an email from her that didn't list a residency, and neither Andrew or I have been able to locate it. But I would nominate Kate Stout of 266 Main Street, Deborah Richardson of 57 Harrison Avenue, Don Shoblies of 7 Wright Farm, Bob Schulman of 680 Main Street, Ann Umphrey of 468 Old Bedford Road, and Jeff Young of 264 Bedford Street to the dog study, feasibility study.
Sounds like a great list, and I look forward to nominations at the next select board meeting. We also have an appointment.
I move to appoint James Burns of 1515 Main Street to the Concord Housing Development Corporation for a term to expire May 31st, 2020.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, well, I believe that is.
I would make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you all for joining us.